The small town where Daniel lived was not a place where dreams were easy to chase. Every corner of the main street held small businesses that struggled to stay open, and people lived modest lives. Daniel was a father of 2 young children, a boy named Ethan and a girl named Lily. His wife had left years earlier, so Daniel raised his kids alone, doing everything he could to provide for them. He worked long shifts at the local hardware store during the day, and in the evenings he helped a neighbor fix old cars for extra cash. Even with all of his effort, he was constantly short on money, sometimes choosing to skip meals so his kids would never go hungry. Despite the hardship, Daniel never complained in front of his children. He would always smile when they asked for ice cream, even if he had to count coins carefully to afford it. He told them bedtime stories about great heroes and brave explorers, and he often reminded them that life had a way of surprising those who never gave up. His kids admired him, not for the money he didn't have, but for the love and dedication he showed every single day. Then came the unexpected letter. It arrived one gray morning in a plain white envelope. Daniel opened it with little interest, thinking it was another bill, but instead it was from a lawyer. His distant uncle, whom he barely remembered, had passed away and left him an inheritance. At first, Daniel thought it was a mistake. Why would an uncle who never visited, never called, and barely knew him leave anything to him? Still, the letter was clear. The inheritance was a property, an old junkyard at the edge of town. When Daniel shared the news with his neighbors, they laughed. A junkyard? One man chuckled at the grocery store. You'll be rich in rust, another woman said with pity in her voice. Oh, Daniel, I thought you were finally catching a break. But a pile of broken cars? That's nothing but trouble. Even some of his relatives shook their heads, claiming the uncle had played a cruel joke on him. They said the land was worthless and full of scrap metal no one wanted. Daniel tried to ignore the comments, but inside he felt the weight of doubt. His children, however, had a different reaction. Ethan's eyes lit up with excitement. Dad, a junkyard is like a treasure hunt. You never know what's hiding there. Lily clapped her hands and said, Maybe we'll find something shiny. Their innocence gave Daniel the courage to at least go see the place before deciding what to do with it. The following weekend, Daniel drove his children to the edge of town. The junkyard stood behind tall chain-link fences with faded signs that read, No trespassing. The gate creaked as he pushed it open, and the 3 of them stepped into a world frozen in time. Old cars were stacked in towers, some missing doors, others covered in vines. Rusted tractors sat forgotten in corners, and piles of twisted metal gleamed under the sunlight. To most people it looked like a graveyard of machines, but to Ethan and Lily, it was an adventure playground. Daniel walked through the rows slowly, his boots crunching on gravel, his mind heavy with worry. He wondered what he could possibly do with this place. He had no money to clean it up, and buyers would likely offer next to nothing for it. Still, there was something strange about the atmosphere. The junkyard didn't feel entirely useless. It was quiet, almost too quiet, as if secrets were hidden beneath the dust and vines. His uncle had lived a solitary life, rarely speaking to the family. But Daniel remembered hearing whispers that the man had once worked as a mechanic during the war years. Some even said he collected unusual machines. Daniel brushed the thought aside, assuming it was just town gossip. Yet, as he walked deeper into the property, past the obvious piles of junk, he noticed old sheds in the far corner. Their wooden walls leaned from age, and the locks on the doors were rusted shut. The children ran ahead, giggling as they peeked into broken cars and found spider webs. Daniel followed, his eyes fixed on the sheds. Something about them stirred his curiosity. Unlike the rest of the junkyard, which seemed open and careless, these sheds looked guarded. Why would his uncle lock them so tightly? That night, back at their small rented house, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with bills spread out in front of him. He sighed as he tried to figure out how to stretch his paycheck to cover rent, food, and the rising cost of electricity. The junkyard papers lay to the side, reminding him of the property he didn't know how to handle. He thought about selling it quickly, just to get rid of the burden, but then he remembered the sheds. For reasons he couldn't explain, he decided to wait. The following days were filled with whispers and jokes from townsfolk. At the hardware store, his co-workers teased him. Hey, Daniel, found your fortune in rusty bolts yet? At the school, a teacher joked, Maybe you can build a playground out of all that junk. He laughed politely but felt the sting inside. What they didn't know was how much he already struggled with self-doubt. Being mocked only made the weight heavier. Still, his children's faith kept him going. Ethan asked when they could go back to the junkyard. Lily drew pictures of treasures they might discover. Their enthusiasm planted a small seed of hope in Daniel's heart. He started thinking that maybe, just maybe, his uncle had left him more than just rust. One evening, he told his children, "We'll go back this weekend. We'll clean up a little and we'll see what's inside those sheds." Ethan cheered while Lily hugged her father tightly. To them, it wasn't about money or property. It was about adventure with their dad. That night, as Daniel lay in bed, he stared at the ceiling and thought about how life had treated him. He remembered the long years of working without rest, the lonely nights when he doubted he could raise his kids alone, and the mornings when he forced a smile so they wouldn't see his struggles. He wondered if fate was finally giving him a chance, even if it came disguised as a junkyard. He didn't know what lay ahead. All he knew was that he had to try. He had to believe that hidden inside the piles of metal and forgotten machines, there might be something waiting to change their lives. The next Saturday morning, Daniel packed some sandwiches, bottled water, and a few tools into an old backpack. Ethan carried a flashlight, pretending he was an explorer, while Lily brought a notebook and crayons to draw anything interesting they might find. Their excitement filled the small house like sunshine, and Daniel couldn't help but smile. For the first time in many years, he felt a little spark of hope inside. They drove out of town, the dusty road stretching ahead as the junkyard slowly appeared on the horizon. The gate squeaked as before, and Daniel parked the car just outside. As they walked through the rows of broken-down vehicles, Daniel tried to see things differently. Instead of piles of rust, he began to notice details he had overlooked before. Numbers painted on old doors, strange machines stacked in the corners, and pieces of equipment that didn't look like ordinary scrap. But for every new detail he noticed, there was also the crushing reality. The junkyard was enormous, filled with hundreds of wrecked cars and rusted machinery. Cleaning it up would take months, maybe years, and Daniel didn't have the time or the money. At the back of his mind, he wondered if the people in town had been right to laugh at him. What if this place really was nothing but a graveyard for useless junk? He tried not to let his doubt show. Ethan climbed into an old pickup truck without wheels, pretending to drive. "Look, Dad, I'm taking us to the mountains," he shouted. Lily sat in the back seat, drawing with her crayons. Daniel laughed softly, grateful for their innocence. They didn't see the piles of scrap as worthless. They saw them as adventures. By midday, they reached the sheds Daniel had noticed before. The wooden structures stood quietly in the farthest corner of the junkyard, partly hidden by tall weeds and a leaning fence. The doors were secured with heavy locks that had long since turned orange with rust. Daniel touched one of the locks and felt the rough flakes crumble under his fingers. "Dad, what do you think is inside?" Ethan asked, shining his flashlight at the gap under the door. Lily crouched beside him, her eyes wide. Daniel didn't answer right away. He didn't want to raise their hopes without reason. Still, he felt something unusual about these sheds. Unlike the rest of the junkyard, which seemed thrown together without care, these buildings looked guarded, as if someone had tried hard to keep whatever was inside safe. He pulled a crowbar from his backpack. "Let's find out," he said quietly. It wasn't easy. The metal bent, the wood groaned, and Daniel's hands grew sore as he tried to force the lock open. After a long struggle, the lock finally snapped, falling to the ground with a dull clink. Dust rose as he pushed the door open. The children peered inside, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. At first, it looked like nothing more than a large pile covered with tarps. But the shape was unusual. The canvas stretched wide, forming a curved outline that didn't match the form of a car or tractor. Daniel stepped closer, his heart beating faster. The air inside smelled old, like oil and iron, mixed with the mustiness of wood. Slowly, he pulled back one corner of the tarp. Beneath it was smooth metal, faded but still solid and painted with markings he didn't recognize. The children gasped. "Dad!" "It looks like an airplane," Ethan whispered. Daniel froze. He had expected spare parts or some strange machine, but not this. He pulled more of the tarp away and the shape became clearer. There were wings folded along the sides, an engine that looked massive compared to any car, and a cockpit with glass so dusty it was nearly opaque. For several minutes, they just stared in silence. It was hard to believe what they were seeing. Why would his uncle keep an airplane hidden in a shed inside a junkyard? And not just one. When Daniel looked around, he noticed other shapes under tarps in the far corners of the shed. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Dad, are these real?" Daniel didn't know how to answer. He wasn't an expert on planes, but he had seen enough pictures in history books to recognize the style. The body was narrow, the wings sharp, and the engine design looked like something from an earlier era. He thought of the rumors about his uncle being a mechanic during wartime. Could it be true that he had collected these planes? Before he could think further, Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, what if it's worth something?" she asked. Her voice was innocent, but her words carried a heavy weight. Daniel knelt down and looked at his children. "Maybe it is, but we have to be careful. If this is what I think it is, we need someone who knows about planes to look at it." That night, Daniel could hardly sleep. He lay awake thinking about what they had seen. His mind filled with questions. Were these planes valuable or just old relics no one cared about? Were they even safe to touch? He worried about telling anyone, afraid that people might come and take them before he even understood what they were. The next day, he quietly asked around town if anyone knew about his uncle's past. Most people just shrugged, saying the old man kept to himself. But one elderly neighbor remembered something unusual. "Your uncle," the man said, "used to talk about machines from the war. Said he worked on them once." Folks thought he was just telling tall tales. Maybe he wasn't. Daniel's curiosity grew stronger. The shed suddenly seemed like the heart of the junkyard, the one part that could change everything. But he was also afraid. What if it turned out to be nothing? What if it was just worthless scrap dressed in the shape of old planes? He already had enough burdens. He didn't want to carry another disappointment. That weekend, he returned with his children again. This time they brought gloves, masks, and better flashlights. Together they pulled back more tarps, revealing a second plane, then a third. Each one carried strange symbols, faded paint, and designs unlike anything Daniel had ever seen in real life. He could hardly breathe. The doubt that had haunted him began to mix with excitement. These weren't ordinary machines. These were something special, something hidden away for decades. His uncle hadn't just left him a junkyard. He had left behind a mystery. As the sun set that evening, Daniel stood in front of the sheds with his children. The light painted the sky in orange and gold, and the planes inside cast long shadows across the dusty ground. Ethan leaned against him and whispered, "Dad, I think we found treasure." Daniel put an arm around both of his children. He didn't know yet if it was treasure in the way most people thought of it, money, riches, fortune. But he knew it was something important, something that gave him hope. For the first time in years, he felt that their lives might be about to change. Daniel woke up early the next morning, his mind still buzzing with what they had uncovered in the sheds. The images of the planes refused to leave his head. They were too detailed, too carefully stored to be ordinary scrap. He wanted to believe they were rare, valuable, maybe even historic, but his fear of being wrong weighed heavily on him. What if they turned out to be useless, nothing but rusted shells from an age long forgotten? The idea of letting his children down crushed him more than anything. At breakfast, Ethan and Lily chatted excitedly about the discovery. Ethan said he wanted to be a pilot one day, and Lily drew a picture of the plane with bright crayons. Daniel smiled at their joy, though he remained cautious. "We need to find someone who knows about planes," he told them gently. "Someone who can tell us the truth." That afternoon, Daniel drove into town and stopped by the local library. He spent hours flipping through old books, studying black and white photos of aircraft from the 1940s. The more he looked, the more convinced he became. The shape of the wings, the design of the cockpit, and the large engines all matched the planes used during World War II. His hands trembled as he traced the outlines in the books. If this was true, then what they had found could be priceless. But Daniel wasn't ready to trust only books. He needed an expert. After some thought, he remembered a man named Mr. Reynolds, a retired history teacher who had once given lectures about the war at the town hall. Daniel had never spoken to him much, but he knew the man was passionate about old military stories. Gathering his courage, Daniel visited him the next day. Mr. Reynolds opened the door slowly, adjusting his glasses as he looked at Daniel. "Well, if it isn't young Daniel," he said warmly. "What brings you here?" Daniel hesitated for a moment before answering. "Sir, I think I've found something. In my uncle's old junkyard. Could you come and take a look?" The old man raised an eyebrow. What sort of something? Daniel swallowed hard. Airplanes, old ones. Maybe from the war. For a second, Mr. Reynolds just stared, then laughed softly. Son, people have claimed all kinds of things over the years. You're not the first to think they've stumbled onto history. I know, Daniel said quickly. But I'm serious, please, just come see it. Perhaps it was Daniel's earnest tone, or perhaps the curiosity of an old teacher who loved history. But Mr. Reynolds agreed. That weekend, Daniel brought him and his children back to the junkyard. As they walked toward the sheds, the old man leaned heavily on his cane, muttering about wasted trips. Then Daniel pushed open the shed doors. Dust swirled in the sunlight, and the tarp-covered plane stood silently inside. Ethan and Lily ran ahead, pointing with excitement. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward slowly, his eyes widening behind his glasses. His cane slipped a little as his hand began to shake. Good heavens, he whispered. Daniel held his breath. Are they real? The old man moved closer, brushing away dust from the metal surface. His fingers traced the faded symbols, the painted numbers, the shape of the wings. He stepped back, tears forming in his eyes. These are authentic, genuine fighter planes, World War II models. I never thought I'd see them outside of a museum. Daniel's heart pounded. His children cheered, but he could hardly process the words. Authentic, genuine, not scrap, not junk, history itself. Mr. Reynolds explained with excitement. This here is a P-51 Mustang, he said, pointing to one of the planes. And over there, my goodness, that looks like a Spitfire. Do you understand, Daniel? These machines aren't just valuable, they're treasures of history. People all over the world would give anything to see them, let alone own them. Daniel felt dizzy. He had expected something unusual, but not this. His uncle had hidden away a fortune in metal wings. Suddenly all the mockery, all the laughter of the townspeople echoed in his mind. They had called it worthless junk, but here stood proof that it was anything but. Still, Daniel worried. Are they worth anything? I mean, in money? The old man chuckled. Worth anything? Son, collectors and museums would pay millions for these. Millions. Even in their current condition. Restored, they'd be priceless. The weight of those words hit Daniel like a storm. Millions. That amount could change his family's life forever. No more skipping meals, no more sleepless nights wondering how to pay bills. His children could have the future they deserved. For the rest of the day, Mr. Reynolds walked around the planes, examining each detail, explaining their history. He told the children stories about brave pilots and epic battles, making the machines come alive with tales of courage. Ethan listened wide-eyed while Lily scribbled notes in her little notebook, her face glowing with wonder. When evening came, Mr. Reynolds placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Protect them, son. Don't let anyone know until you're ready. There are people who might try to take advantage of you. But make no mistake, you've been given something extraordinary. That night, Daniel lay awake again, but this time it wasn't from worry. His heart raced with excitement, his mind alive with possibilities. He imagined paying off debts, buying a safe home for his children, maybe even saving enough to help others. For years, he had carried the weight of struggle, mocked and pitied by everyone. Now fate had finally given him a chance to rise. The following days felt surreal. Daniel went to work as usual, stocking shelves and fixing things at the hardware store, but his thoughts were far away. Every sound of coins clinking in the cash register reminded him of the fortune waiting quietly in the sheds. Every time someone joked about his scrap heap, he smiled secretly, knowing what they didn't. But he also felt a growing responsibility. These planes weren't just money. They were history, legacy, and memory of those who had flown them. His uncle hadn't left him junk. He had left him a secret inheritance that carried meaning far beyond wealth. Daniel decided to take the next step. He called a museum in the nearest city and asked if they could send someone to inspect the planes officially. He kept his voice calm, giving only the basics, not wanting to draw attention. The curator on the phone sounded skeptical at first, but when Daniel described the models, his tone changed immediately. Within days, experts arranged to visit. As the date drew near, Daniel's nerves grew. He didn't tell anyone in town. He didn't want greedy eyes turning toward the junkyard before he even knew the true value. Only his children knew, and their excitement balanced his fear. Every night they whispered about the future, about new shoes, better school supplies, maybe even a trip they had always dreamed of. Daniel promised them one thing: Whatever happens, this will change our lives. Not just with money, but with pride. People will see us differently. And in his heart, he knew it was true. The discovery had already changed him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like a struggling dad weighed down by bad luck. He felt like a man standing at the edge of something great. What he didn't realize was that the real storm had only just begun. The morning the experts arrived, Daniel felt as nervous as he had ever been. He woke up before sunrise, unable to eat breakfast. His children, however, could not contain their excitement. Ethan ran around the small house pretending to be a pilot, while Lily packed her notebook and crayons into her little bag, determined to record every detail. Daniel smiled at their joy, but inside his heart raced. Today would confirm whether his uncle's hidden machines were truly valuable or just old shells. At around 10 o'clock, a white van pulled up outside the junkyard. 3 men stepped out, dressed in clean shirts and wearing badges that identified them as representatives from a historical aviation museum. One of them, a tall man with gray hair and sharp eyes, introduced himself as Dr. Harris, the chief curator. The other 2 were younger, carrying clipboards and cameras. "Mr. Daniels?" Dr. Harris asked, shaking his hand firmly. "You told us you had something unusual to show us. I'll be honest, we receive many calls like yours, but most turn out to be misunderstandings. Still, we're here to take a look." Daniel nodded, his palms sweating. "I understand. Please follow me." He led them through the rows of rusted cars and twisted machines until they reached the sheds. The experts looked unimpressed at first, perhaps expecting nothing more than piles of metal. But when Daniel opened the doors and the sunlight spilled across the tarps, their expressions changed instantly. Dr. Harris froze, his eyes widening. The younger men gasped. One nearly dropped his camera. "My word," Dr. Harris whispered as he stepped forward. He pulled back a tarp carefully, revealing the gleaming outline of a plane's nose. This is impossible." For the next several hours, the experts moved around the sheds like men possessed. They examined every inch of the planes, brushing off dust, snapping photographs, taking notes, and even climbing small ladders to peer into the cockpits. Their excitement grew with each discovery. "These are authentic," one of the younger men said breathlessly. "This one here is a Mustang. And that's a Spitfire." "They're intact, remarkably preserved." Dr. Harris turned to Daniel, his face serious but full of energy. "Do you realize what you have here? These are not just rare, they are treasures. Only a handful of these planes still exist in the world, and most are in museums or in the hands of private collectors. Finding even one would be historic. But you have several." Daniel felt his knees weaken. He held on to the edge of the shed door for support. "So they're valuable?" "Valuable?" Dr. Harris laughed softly. "Mr. Daniels, these planes, even in their current state, could be worth millions of dollars. Restored, their value would multiply. And beyond money, they represent history itself, stories of courage, sacrifice, and victory. People from all over the world would travel just to see them." Ethan's eyes grew wide and Lily clutched her notebook to her chest. Daniel looked at his children, then back at the experts. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. For years he had been the struggling father no one believed in, mocked for inheriting a junkyard. Now, the very place people laughed at had revealed a treasure greater than anything he could have imagined. The experts stayed late into the afternoon, cataloging details and making arrangements. They explained that they would notify collectors, museums, and restoration teams. Offers would come soon, they promised. Before leaving, Dr. Harris shook Daniel's hand firmly. "Protect this place. Lock it up tight. What you have here is extraordinary, and once word spreads, there will be no shortage of people who want a piece of it." As the van disappeared down the dusty road, Daniel sat on a rusted car hood, staring at the horizon. His children sat beside him, tired but happy. "Dad," Ethan said softly, "does this mean we're rich?" Daniel smiled faintly. "It means things are about to change. For all of us." Over the next few weeks, the news spread faster than Daniel could have imagined. First, a local reporter somehow caught wind of the story. Then regional papers picked it up, followed by national news outlets. Headlines flashed across screens. "Rare WWII planes found in small-town junkyard. Struggling dad inherits millions in hidden treasure, and forgotten warbirds uncovered after decades." The same neighbors who once mocked him now stopped by with wide eyes and polite smiles. They spoke to him with respect, some even apologizing for their earlier laughter. Relatives who had ignored him for years suddenly called, eager to reconnect. Daniel listened quietly but kept his focus on his children and the future. He knew that attention would bring both admiration and envy. Collectors began sending letters and making phone calls. Some offered incredible sums of money on the spot, hoping to buy the planes quickly. Daniel, however, remembered Dr. Harris's warning. He decided to move slowly, seeking advice and carefully considering each step. He refused to let excitement blind him to the responsibility he carried. One evening, he sat at the kitchen table with Ethan and Lily. Papers were spread out in front of them, letters from collectors, estimates from restoration experts, and proposals from museums. Daniel looked at his children. "We need to make a choice," he said softly. "We could sell everything and live comfortably, or we could keep part of it, preserve it, and share it with the world. What do you think?" Ethan thought for a moment. "Dad, you always said we should never forget history. Maybe we should give one to a museum so everyone can see it." Lily nodded. "And then we can sell the rest so we can have a house with a garden." Daniel chuckled, moved by their simple wisdom. "I think you're right. We'll honor history and build our future." Soon after, he contacted Dr. Harris again and agreed to donate one of the planes to the National Museum, in memory of his late uncle who had preserved them so carefully. The rest would be carefully auctioned, with collectors and institutions bidding from around the world. The auctions were nothing short of extraordinary. Bidders competed fiercely, numbers climbing higher and higher until Daniel could hardly believe his ears. When the dust settled, the total value of the planes was estimated at $15 million. Daniel, the man who had once struggled to buy groceries, now held a fortune. But more important than the money was the pride. The world no longer saw him as the man with a junkyard. They saw him as the man who uncovered history, the father who had persevered through hardship, the guardian of treasures long forgotten. As the planes were moved carefully from the sheds to transport vehicles, Daniel stood with his children watching. The community gathered, cheering and applauding. Ethan clutched his father's hand while Lily waved at the workers. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He whispered quietly to himself, "Thank you, Uncle. Thank you for believing in me in your own way." That night in their small home, Daniel tucked his children into bed. Ethan asked, "Dad, are you happy now?" Daniel kissed his forehead and said, "I've always been happy because I had you and your sister. But now the world sees us the way you always saw me, and that makes me proud." For the first time in many years, Daniel lay down without fear of tomorrow. The junkyard, once a symbol of mockery, had become the key to a new life. The laughter of others no longer mattered because he had found something more powerful: respect, pride, and a legacy worth remembering. The weeks after the auction felt like a dream to Daniel and his children. Their lives, once defined by struggle and doubt, suddenly filled with opportunity and light. Each morning, Daniel woke up to the sound of his children's laughter, not the heavy weight of unpaid bills. For the first time in years, he could look at their future without fear. He decided to move carefully with the new fortune. Instead of rushing into big changes, Daniel wanted every step to mean something. His first decision was to buy a modest but beautiful house on the edge of town. It wasn't a mansion or something extravagant, but it had enough space for Ethan and Lily to play in the yard, and it had a garden where Lily could grow flowers. When they first arrived, the children ran through the rooms with joy, claiming their bedrooms and imagining where to put their toys. Daniel walked slowly through the hallways, touching the walls with his hand, hardly believing this home was truly his. The neighbors who once laughed now looked at Daniel with respect. Some even stopped by with gifts or baked goods, eager to be friendly. Daniel accepted their kindness politely, though he remembered their earlier words. He didn't hold grudges, but he also didn't forget. In his heart, he knew that true respect was not about money, but about standing tall in the face of hardship. He chose to honor his uncle in a very public way. When the museum held a ceremony to unveil the donated plane, Daniel and his children stood proudly in front of the crowd. The plane had been cleaned, polished, and displayed with a plaque that bore both his uncle's name and Daniel's family name. Reporters took photographs, and the director of the museum spoke about how important it was to preserve history. When it was Daniel's turn to speak, his voice was steady but full of emotion. "My uncle lived a quiet life," he said, "and many thought he left behind nothing of value. But he preserved something that mattered, something that tells the story of courage and sacrifice. I am proud to share it with the world. This is not just about wealth. It's about remembering who we are and honoring those who came before us. The audience applauded, and his children clapped the loudest. Ethan whispered to his sister, "Dad sounds like a hero." Lily nodded, eyes shining with pride. Life became easier, but Daniel never forgot the years of struggle. He used part of his fortune to set up savings accounts for his children, ensuring their education would be secure. He also created a small scholarship fund in his uncle's name, helping local students who dreamed of studying history or engineering. It was his way of giving back, of turning his unexpected blessing into something that would inspire others. At home, things changed in small but meaningful ways. The fridge was always full, and Daniel no longer had to count coins at the store. Ethan finally got the model airplane kit he had wanted for years, and Lily had her own desk where she could draw and write. They went on family trips for the first time, visiting museums, beaches, and parks. Each experience became a memory etched in their hearts. But even with all the changes, Daniel remained the same at his core. He still worked with his hands, fixing small things around the house, teaching Ethan how to use tools and helping Lily plant seeds in the garden. He still told bedtime stories, only now those stories included the real adventure they had lived together. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Ethan asked a question that made Daniel pause. "Dad, do you think Uncle hid those planes because he wanted you to find them?" Daniel thought for a long moment before answering. Maybe he did. Maybe he wanted someone who wouldn't just sell everything without care. Maybe he wanted them to be found by someone who understood what it means to struggle and to value more than money. I think in his own way he trusted me. That thought stayed with Daniel. The junkyard was no longer just a piece of land with rust and weeds. It was the place where his life had turned, where mockery had turned into respect, and where he had learned that treasures are not always obvious to the world. Sometimes they are hidden beneath dust, waiting for someone who believes to uncover them. Years passed, and Ethan grew taller, his interest in aviation deepening with each passing day. Inspired by the discovery, he dreamed of becoming an engineer and building planes of his own. Lily, with her notebooks full of sketches and stories, leaned toward history and art, fascinated by the tales her father and the museum told. Daniel encouraged both of them, proud that the legacy of those planes had planted seeds of ambition in his children. The townspeople never forgot the story either. Whenever new visitors came, locals would proudly point to the museum and say, "That plane came from our town, from Daniel's junkyard." The place that was once mocked became a symbol of pride for the whole community. One quiet night, long after the children had gone to bed, Daniel sat alone in the garden. The stars glittered above him and the air was calm. He thought back to the day he had first opened that letter about the inheritance. He had felt so disappointed, so burdened by what seemed like a useless gift, and yet, it had been the beginning of everything. He realized then that life has a way of hiding blessings in unexpected places. What seems worthless at first may hold the key to a future brighter than one can imagine. His journey from being laughed at to being respected was not just about money or planes. It was about faith, resilience, and the courage to look deeper when others only saw the surface. Daniel whispered softly to the night, "Thank you, Uncle. Thank you for leaving me more than a junkyard. Thank you for giving me hope." The wind stirred gently through the trees, and Daniel felt a peace he had not known for years. He knew that his children's future was secure, but more importantly, he knew that they would carry forward the lesson he had learned. Never measure worth by appearances, and never give up when life looks hopeless. The story of the struggling dad who inherited a junkyard would live on, not as a tale of pity, but as a true story of transformation, discovery, and legacy. And as Daniel closed his eyes and leaned back in his chair, he knew that the laughter of others no longer mattered. What mattered was the pride in his children's eyes, the strength in his own heart, and the treasure of knowing he had turned dust into destiny.